Stay away from my daughter.
A desperate mother sees danger in every act of kindness, running from the one person trying to save her. Her past has taught her that generosity always comes with a price, that every extended hand hides a blade waiting to strike. But when her child's life hangs by a thread and a stranger pays a debt he was never owed, she must confront a terrifying question: what if she has been running from her only hope all along? Welcome to Golden Heart Stories. This is the story of a mother who feared every kindness and the man who refused to let her face the world alone. The evening light filters through the wide windows of Blue Lantern Grill, casting amber streaks across worn wooden tables, where the after-work crowd settles into their familiar rhythms. Laughter mingles with the clink of silverware, and the air carries the rich aroma of garlic bread and simmering tomato sauce. In a corner booth near the kitchen doors, Rowan slides into the vinyl seat across from his daughter Aria, whose school backpack still hangs from her small shoulders. The girl's eyes light up as a server places a plate of spaghetti before her, steam rising in delicate curls. Rowan watches her with the quiet satisfaction of a father who has finally reached solid ground after years of uncertainty. His calloused hands, marked by years of construction work, rest on the table as he observes the simple joy of providing his daughter a warm meal in a safe place. This moment, ordinary to others, feels sacred to him. Near the entrance, beneath the flickering neon sign advertising daily specials, Mira stands frozen with her hand buried deep in her coat pocket. Her fingers count and recount the coins and crumpled bills she knows by heart. $2.37. Her face, pale and drawn from sleepless nights, betrays the calculation happening behind her eyes. The cheapest item on the menu board glows at $3.50. $1.13 short. The gap might as well be a canyon. Her 5-year-old daughter Sage presses against her leg, looking up with eyes that hold too much understanding for such a young child. The little girl has learned not to ask, learned to wait in silence, learned to ignore the hollow ache in her stomach. Myra's throat tightens as she feels that familiar wave of shame crashing over her, the kind that makes her skin burn and her vision blur at the edges. Sage's gaze drifts across the restaurant, pulled by instinct toward the source of that intoxicating smell. Her eyes lock onto Aria's plate, where perfectly twirled pasta glistens under the overhead lights. The child's expression shifts in that heartbreaking way hunger reveals itself in the very young and naked longing that adults have learned to hide. Her small hand unconsciously moves to her stomach, as if trying to quiet the growling that only she can hear. Mira catches the direction of her daughter's stare and feels something crack inside her chest. This is the moment she dreads most. The moment when her child's need becomes visible to the world. When their poverty stops being a private struggle and becomes a public exhibition. Rowan notices the mother and daughter near the entrance. Something in their stillness, in the way they hover at the threshold between staying and leaving, resonates with a memory he carries in his bones. He sees the careful way Mira avoids meeting anyone's eyes, the protective curve of her body around her child. Recognition flares in his mind, not of these specific people, but of the posture of desperation he once wore himself. Without hesitation, he rises from his seat, his chair scraping softly against the floor. He moves toward them with genuine concern etched into his weathered face, his hand already reaching for his wallet. But before he can speak, before he can offer the help forming on his lips, Myra's head snaps up. Her eyes widen with something beyond surprise. Raw terror floods her features. She sees his approaching figure, his extended hand, his concerned expression, and every instinct screams danger. Her breath comes sharp and quick. She grabs Sage's wrist with trembling fingers, and pulls her daughter toward the door with such sudden force that the child stumbles. "No, we have to go, now." The words crack like breaking glass. Mira pushes through the entrance, the bell chiming mockingly cheerful as they disappear into the darkening street. Rowan stands motionless in the middle of the restaurant, his hand still frozen in that gesture of offering, confusion and hurt washing across his face. Around them, other diners pause their conversations, forks hovering midair, witnessing a transaction they cannot understand. The warmth of the restaurant suddenly feels oppressive. Somewhere in the background, Aria calls out softly, asking what happened. Rowan has no answer. He only knows that his attempt at kindness just terrified someone. And he cannot comprehend why. Rowan sits alone in his truck outside Blue Lantern Grill long after the sky has deepened to indigo. The engine ticks as it cools, a rhythmic sound that fills the silence pressing against his ears. He grips the steering wheel with both hands, his knuckles white, replaying the moment again and again like a film loop he cannot stop. The woman's face, that flash of pure terror, burns behind his eyelids every time he blinks. He had only wanted to help, had only extended the same compassion someone once showed him when he was drowning in desperation. His mind circles the same question, wearing a groove into his thoughts. What did she see in him that made her run? What monster did his face become in her eyes? He thinks of Arya, asking why the lady looked so scared, and he had no words to explain what he himself cannot comprehend. The confusion settles heavy in his chest, a weight that makes breathing feel deliberate. He had approached with open hands, with concern, with nothing but good intention, yet somehow he had become the threat. The injustice of it stings, but beneath the hurt lies something deeper, a gnawing worry that perhaps he had been clumsy, perhaps he had moved too quickly, perhaps his kindness had worn the wrong mask. 15 blocks away, in a cramped apartment where water stains bloom across the ceiling like dark flowers, Mira presses her back against the locked door. Her heart still hammers against her ribs with the frantic rhythm of prey that has barely escaped. Sage sleeps fitfully on the threadbare couch, her small body curled tight, stomach still empty. Myra's hands shake as she wraps her arms around herself, trying to contain the trembling that radiates from her core. She knows that face, that approach, that calculated kindness. Not his face specifically, but the pattern it follows. It always begins this way: a helpful gesture, a concerned smile, an offer that seems too generous to refuse. The net is woven from silk at first, so soft you do not feel it tightening until escape becomes impossible. Her mind catapults backward through the years to Corvin Nash. And the way he had approached her outside the grocery store when she was 23 years old and desperate for work. He had seemed kind then too, had offered help with such apparent sincerity. And by the time she understood the price of his generosity, she was already trapped in obligations she could not repay, in debts that kept multiplying, in a situation where saying no meant losing everything. The man at the restaurant, Rowan, she does not know his name yet, had moved toward her with that same purposeful stride, that same reaching hand. She had seen where that road leads, and she will not walk it again. Her daughter will not grow up watching her mother become someone's possession, someone's kept woman, someone who trades dignity for survival. Better to starve than to owe a man anything. Better to run than to wait and discover what he truly wants in return. The memories fracture and multiply, casting different shadows. Rowan remembers being 28 years old, living in his truck with infant Arya wrapped in every blanket he owned. Parked behind a grocery store where the manager threatened to call the police. He remembers the man named Elias Montrose who approached him not with judgment, but with a job offer, who gave him a chance to earn his way back to stability without ever making him feel small. That memory is the foundation of who Rowan has become, the reason he believes in extending hands to people who are falling. He cannot see himself through Myra's eyes, cannot fathom that his kindness might look like the first move in a predator's game. Mira remembers Carvin's hand on her shoulder, his voice in her ear promising safety. While his other hand took her keys, took her freedom, took pieces of her she will never recover. She remembers the nights spent wondering if tonight would be the night he stopped pretending kindness and showed his true face. She cannot see Rowan through any lens except the one ground from that. Trauma cannot separate his gesture from the ones that destroyed her trust in human decency. The viewer watching these parallel truths begins to understand the terrible chasm opening between them. Two people who have survived their own versions of hell, who carry scars that shape how they interpret the world. Neither is wrong. Neither is lying. Both are prisoners of their past, reading the present through distorted glass. The question hanging in the air is not who is right, but whether they will ever see each other clearly. Or whether their histories will keep them forever locked in this tragic misunderstanding where compassion looks like danger and fear looks like rejection. Harborview Park stretches along the waterfront like a green ribbon, its ancient oak trees casting dappled shadows across worn playground equipment and winding paths. The location makes perfect sense for Rowan, who pulls into the gravel parking lot every weekday at 3:45. Exactly 15 minutes after Arya's school dismisses 2 blocks away. He waits on the bench near the swings, his work boots still dusty from the construction site, watching parents push toddlers and elderly couples feed pigeons. When Arya bursts through the park entrance, backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her face lights up at the sight of him. This ritual has become sacred to them both, this daily hour where father and daughter exist in a bubble of normalcy before heading home. Arya races to the monkey bars, her laughter ringing clear as bells, while Rowan sits with his thermos of coffee, content to simply be present in her childhood. The park is convenient, practical, and blessedly close to everything they need. He thinks nothing of returning day after day to the same spot, the same bench, the same routine that gives structure to their lives. 3 days after the restaurant incident, Mira discovers Harborview Park through sheer necessity. Her apartment building sits just 4 blocks south, and Sage has been climbing the walls of their tiny space like a caged animal desperate for open air. The park costs nothing, requires nothing, and offers her daughter a few precious hours of childhood that their circumstances try constantly to steal. Mira sits on a different bench, one partially hidden behind a cluster of hydrangea bushes, where she can watch Sage without being too visible herself. The girl runs to the sandbox with an urgency that breaks Mira's heart, and for a moment her daughter looks like any other child, unburdened by hunger and fear. Mira allows herself to breathe, to let her shoulders drop from their perpetual defensive hunch. This place could become their refuge, she thinks. A small piece of normal life carved from chaos. The second day, Mira arrives to find him already there. Rowan sits on his usual bench, watching Arya navigate the climbing structure with careful attention. Mira's breath catches in her throat. Her hands instinctively move to her bag, checking that her phone is accessible, that she has an escape route. But she tells herself it is coincidence. The park is public, popular, centrally located. Of course other people use it. She positions herself on the far side, keeping maximum distance, her eyes tracking his every movement. While pretending to read a book she pulled from a free library box. When Sage squeals with delight at the slide, Mira flinches, terrified the sound will draw his attention. It does. Rowan's head turns briefly, and their eyes meet across the expanse of grass and playground equipment. Mira looks away instantly, her pulse hammering in her ears. They leave 10 minutes later. The pattern repeats. Day 3, Day 4, Day 5. Each time Mira arrives at Harborview Park, Rowan is already there or arrives shortly after. The coincidence that seemed plausible once begins to feel orchestrated. Mira's mind catalogues every detail. He always sits in the same spot, always arrives at the same time, always seems to be waiting. The logical explanation that his daughter's school is nearby never crosses her mind because fear does not operate on logic. Fear builds narratives from shadows, sees pursuit in patterns, finds proof in repetition. By the 6th encounter, Mira's hands shake as she grips Sage's shoulders. "We need to find a different park, sweetie." Sage's face crumples with confusion and disappointment. This is the first place she has been allowed to play freely in weeks, the first space where her mother's anxiety loosened its grip enough for her to breathe. Now they are leaving again, running again, and the child does not understand why. Mira's eyes dart toward Rowan's bench. He is helping Arya tie her shoe, his back turned, completely unaware of the surveillance. Completely oblivious to how his innocent routine has become sinister in another woman's interpretation. The terrible irony hangs heavy in the spring air, 2 families seeking the same simple peace. The same ordinary joy, but divided by an invisible wall of trauma that transforms every coincidence into evidence of danger. Mira gathers their things quickly, pulling Sage toward the exit while the child protests in a confused whimper. As they leave, Mira glances back one final time. Rowan remains on his bench, absorbed in his daughter's chatter, a man simply being a father. But in Mira's eyes, he has become something else entirely, a pattern, a pursuit, a threat disguised as normality. The phone rings at 9:37 on a Tuesday night, its shrill tone slicing through the quiet of Mira's apartment like a blade through silk. She is folding laundry on the couch, her hands moving mechanically through the worn clothes that never quite come clean in the building's ancient washing machines. When she glances at the screen, no number appears, just the words, unknown caller, glowing in pale letters. Her entire body goes rigid. The basket of clothes tumbles from her lap, scattering socks and shirts across the stained carpet. Her hand hovers over the phone, trembling so violently that her fingers blur. She knows she should not answer. Every instinct screams to let it ring into silence. But the not knowing is worse than knowing, so she presses the green button and lifts the device to her ear with a hand that feels disconnected from her body. Breathing. Just breathing on the other end. No words, no greeting, only the sound of someone listening to her listen to them. 5 seconds. 10. Then the line goes dead. Mira drops the phone as if it has burned her, and the panic that has been living dormant in her chest explodes outward, flooding her limbs with ice water. She staggers to the window, pulls the curtain aside. With shaking fingers and scans the street below for headlights, for shadows, for any sign that he has found her again. The memories come unbidden, crashing through the careful walls she has built to keep them contained. She is 23 years old again, standing in the parking lot of Jensen's grocery with Sage strapped to her chest in a threadbare carrier. Corvin Nash materializes beside her like he has been waiting, his smile warm and his voice smooth as honey. He tells her he owns 3 restaurants, that he is always looking for reliable people, that she looks like someone who works hard. The job offer feels like salvation dropped from heaven into her desperate hands. She does not see the hook buried in the bait. Within 2 weeks, he is driving her to work because her car has mysteriously broken down. Within a month, he is lending her money for rent with casual generosity that makes her throat tight with gratitude. By the 3rd month, she understands the trap has already closed. The money is not a gift but a chain. The rides are not kindness but surveillance. When she tries to repay him, he waves her off with a smile that no longer reaches his eyes. You do not owe me money. You owe me loyalty. The words hang in her memory like smoke that will not dissipate. The demands start: small work, extra shifts without pay, smile at his friends who visit the restaurant, accept rides even when she does not need them. Then they grow. He shows up at her apartment unannounced, letting himself in with a key she never gave him. He calls at midnight to make sure she is home alone. He mentions casually that he knows where Sage's daycare is, what route Mira walks every morning, what time she turns off her lights at night. The surveillance becomes suffocating. She feels his eyes on her even when he is not physically present, feels the weight of his attention like hands around her throat. When she finally gathers the courage to quit, his face transforms into something cold and reptilian. He leans close enough that she can smell his cologne mixing with something darker underneath. Nobody leaves me. Nobody makes me look foolish. I made you, and I can unmake you just as easily. That night, headlights stop outside her window at 2 in the morning. The engine idles for 45 minutes while she sits frozen on her couch, holding Sage against her chest, every muscle locked in terror. The next night, the same. And the next. It takes 6 months of living like a hunted animal before she scrapes together enough money to disappear, to flee across 2 state lines, to become someone else. In a city where Corvin Nash is just a nightmare that cannot follow. But the fear followed anyway. It lives in her bones now, encoded into her nervous system. Teaching her to see every kind gesture as manipulation, every coincidence as surveillance, every man who approaches as Corvin wearing a different face. Standing at her window now, watching the empty street below, Mira understands her hypervigilance is not paranoia, it is survival instinct honed by real danger. The man at the park, Rowan, might be exactly what he appears. But she learned the hard way that monsters rarely announce themselves. They arrive wearing masks of kindness, offering help with open hands, and by the time you see the truth, escape has become impossible. The lunch rush at Montrose Construction has thinned when Derek from Accounting corners Rowan near the coffee station. His voice carries that particular tone of friendly curiosity mixed with concern. The kind that makes observations feel like accusations wrapped in casual conversation. You have been disappearing during lunch breaks lately. Everything okay? Rowan feels heat crawl up his neck, embarrassment at being noticed, at having his movements tracked and questioned. He has been slipping out during lunch, driving to different parts of the city. Sitting in his truck outside community centers and social service offices, trying to figure out how to help without making things worse. The words tangle in his throat because how does he explain that he cannot stop thinking about the terrified woman and her hungry child, that their faces haunt him during every quiet moment. He mumbles something vague about errands, but Derek's eyebrows lift in that knowing way that suggests disbelief. By afternoon, whispers circulate through the office like smoke. Rowan is acting strange, secretive, has been seen in parts of town he has no business being in. The speculation builds a narrative he cannot refute because he cannot explain what he barely understands himself. Mira has returned to Harborview Park despite her better judgment. Because Sage's disappointment was unbearable and staying away would give him power over her choices. But she keeps maximum distance, stays hypervigilant, watches him the way prey watches a predator. She notices things that confirm her worst suspicions. The way Rowan's attention drifts from his daughter to scan the park, his eyes moving systematically across playground equipment and benches. She interprets this as surveillance, as him searching for her, when in reality he is simply monitoring the environment for his child's safety. When he stands to throw away Arya's juice box, Mira reads threat in the casual movement. When he checks his phone, she imagines him documenting her presence, recording her patterns. Her mind, trained by trauma to find danger in innocence, constructs elaborate theory from fragments of ordinary behavior. He is mapping her routine, learning her schedule, preparing for something she knows in her bones will come. The awkwardness in his movements she reads as tension of someone playing a role, maintaining a disguise that will eventually slip. Rowan wrestles with his conscience on the drive home, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles ache. He wants to help, genuinely wants to offer this woman what Elias Montrose once offered him, a path forward with dignity intact. But every instinct warns that approaching directly will deepen her fear. He thinks about job openings at his company, positions requiring no special skills beyond reliability. She could work in the office, something stable with benefits and regular hours. But the offer will sound exactly like what she fears most: a man with power dangling opportunity with invisible strings attached. If he stays away, he abandons someone who needs help. If he reaches out, he confirms himself as the threat she believes him to be. The moral paralysis is agonizing. In desperate logic, he decides to do it properly, through official channels that cannot be misconstrued. He speaks with Jennifer in Human Resources, explaining carefully that he knows someone who might benefit from open positions. Asking her to reach out through proper hiring procedures. Jennifer agrees but asks questions he cannot fully answer. The plan feels clumsy even as he sets it in motion. The job offer arrives in Myra's mailbox 3 days later, a crisp envelope with Montrose Construction's logo embossed in silver. Her hands shake as she reads the formal language inviting her to apply for an entry-level position. The letter mentions the company is committed to helping community members find stable employment. That her situation has been brought to their attention through informal channels. The words feel too perfect, too specifically tailored to her circumstances. Nobody helps like this without reason. Nobody offers salvation without expecting payment. She crumples the letter in her fist, breath coming sharp and fast. He has escalated, she thinks. He has found where she lives, learned her name, involved his company in whatever game he is playing. The offer is not kindness, it is the net closing around her throat. The mothers at Harborview Park gather near the water fountain on Thursday afternoon. Their voices forming a protective chorus with the rhythm of playground supervision. Mira finds herself reluctantly drawn into their orbit when Sage befriends Emma, whose mother Rachel has the kind of confident warmth. The conversation turns to the regulars who frequent this shared territory. When someone mentions Rowan, Myra's entire body goes tense, her shoulders drawing up in defensive posture. That man with the little girl? He is wonderful. My son fell off the monkey bars last month and he was the first one there, knew exactly what to do. Rachel's endorsement carries maternal authority, but another voice cuts through with sharp warning. I do not know. Something about him feels off to me. He watches people too much. My husband says a man alone at a playground is always suspicious. The contradictory assessments ping-pong across the circle, each woman adding observations that prove nothing and everything simultaneously. Some praise his gentleness with Arya, how he patiently ties her shoes and listens when she chatters. Others mention how he sits alone in his truck before entering, how his eyes scan the perimeter with what could be vigilance or something darker. Mira absorbs every word like someone taking notes for a trial, collecting testimonies for a verdict already reached. Positive stories slide off her consciousness like water off glass, but warnings embed like hooks in flesh. When one mother mentions Rowan owns a construction company and has helped families find work, Mira's stomach clenches. The job offer makes terrible sense as part of a larger pattern becoming indispensable, so refusal becomes impossible. That night, anxiety crawls through Mira's apartment like a living thing, making walls press inward and air feel insufficient. She lies awake staring at ceiling stains. Her tired mind transforms into threats. The familiar panic spirals upward, each thought feeding the next in loops she cannot break. She is repeating her past entanglement with Corvin, walking into the same trap with different packaging. The signs are identical: repeated encounters, the job offer, how he has positioned himself at the center of her life without permission. Her breathing becomes shallow, chest tight with fear that has nowhere to go. She thinks about running again, packing belongings into garbage bags and disappearing into another city, another name. But exhaustion has made her bones heavy, and uprooting Sage again. Stealing away the friendships her daughter has finally begun to form, feels like inflicting wounds she is supposed to prevent. Morning brings another envelope, hand-delivered by a woman in professional attire who introduces herself as Jennifer from Montrose Construction Human Resources. She stands in the dingy hallway with clipboard and rehearsed smile. Explaining the position does not require any connection to Rowan, that all applicants go through the same evaluation, that the company believes in community investment. The words meant to reassure instead sound scripted, like lines in a play where everyone knows their role except the audience. Jennifer hands Mira an application packet and mentions Rowan specifically requested she make clear there are no obligations. No strings, no expectations beyond standard employment terms. The clarification confirms rather than eases concerns. He sent someone to her home. He knows where she lives with enough certainty to dispatch representatives. The boundary between help and intrusion has been crossed so thoroughly Mira cannot locate where it once stood. After Jennifer leaves, Mira sits holding the packet, hands trembling with the impossible choice it represents. Accepting means stepping into whatever web he has constructed, placing herself and Sage under his power in ways she cannot predict. Refusing means condemning them to continued poverty, to hunger and instability that grinds away human dignity one day at a time. Both paths lead toward loss. The pressure builds behind her eyes until tears spill over, not from sadness but from sheer exhaustion of being perpetually afraid. Perpetually calculating, perpetually convinced that kindness is just cruelty wearing a patient mask. The fever hits Sage like a tsunami in the middle of the night, transforming her small body into a furnace that burns through blankets and reason alike. Mira wakes to labored breathing, finds her daughter's skin scorching to the touch, her lips cracked and pale, her eyes glassy with delirium. The thermometer reads 104.7 degrees, a number that sends ice through Mira's veins. She tries cold compresses, fever medicine, every home remedy desperation can conjure, but nothing brings the temperature down. When Sage begins convulsing, her small limbs jerking with rhythms that belong to nightmares, Mira's hands shake so violently she can barely dial 911. The operator's calm voice feels obscene against the backdrop of her daughter's suffering, instructions about staying calm. Sounding like they are being transmitted from another universe where mothers do not watch their children slip away. The ambulance arrives with sirens that shatter the 3 a.m. silence, paramedics moving with practiced efficiency that somehow makes everything more terrifying. They load Sage onto a stretcher so small it breaks something fundamental in Mira's chest. Mira climbs into the ambulance, her hand gripping Sage's tiny fingers, whispering promises she has no power to keep. The ride to St. Meridian Hospital blurs into fragments, flashing lights, the paramedic's steady voice reporting vitals, the cold metal bench beneath her. The terrible awareness that she has no insurance and no money and no way to pay for whatever comes next. But those concerns feel distant compared to the primal terror of potentially losing the only thing in the world that matters. The emergency room erupts into controlled chaos the moment they arrive, nurses and doctors swarming with clipboards and questions. Someone mentions bacterial meningitis as a possibility, words that land like bullets. They need to run tests immediately, need to start intravenous antibiotics, need a spinal tap to confirm. And they need a deposit. $2,000 to admit her daughter, to begin treatment, to save her life. Mira stands frozen at the registration desk, her bank account holding exactly $43, her credit cards long since maxed and cancelled, her options narrowing to a pinpoint of impossible choices. She starts to beg, starts to explain, her voice cracking with desperation that strips away every shred of pride. Then Rowan appears like an apparition she cannot quite believe is real. He must have followed the ambulance from somewhere near her building, must have seen the emergency unfold. Without a word, without hesitation, he steps forward and hands his credit card to the registration clerk. The transaction processes in seconds that feel like hours. $2,000 charged with the casual ease of someone for whom that number does not represent months of survival. Mira turns to thank him, to ask why, to process this impossible kindness, but he is already walking away. His footsteps echo down the sterile corridor, and he vanishes through the sliding doors. Before she can form words around the gratitude and confusion choking her throat, a nurse appears at Mira's elbow, gently guiding her toward the treatment area where Sage is already being prepped. But the nurse pauses, her expression softening with recognition that carries its own story. That man who just paid. He used to live in his truck in our parking lot 3 years ago. Had a baby girl with him. Security wanted to call the police, but Dr. Harrison intervened. Mr. Rowan turned his whole life around after that. The words detonate in Mira's understanding like controlled explosions, reshaping everything she thought she knew. The surveillance she imagined was a father ensuring his daughter's safety. The pattern she feared was routine built from necessity. The manipulation she expected was help offered by someone who remembered what drowning feels like. As they wheel Sage into treatment, as Mira follows on legs that barely hold her weight, something fundamental shifts in her perception. The man she has been running from might be the only person who truly understands why she runs. And he just saved her daughter's life without asking for a single thing in return, disappearing before gratitude could become obligation. The realization breaks something open in her chest that fear had sealed shut. Letting in the first dangerous possibility that kindness might sometimes actually be kindness, that not every hand extended hides a blade. 3 days after Sage's fever breaks, after antibiotics have chased the infection from her small body, and doctors have cleared her for discharge, Mira finds Rowan sitting on the bench at Harborview Park. The late afternoon sun filters through oak trees, casting patterns across his weathered face. He looks up when she approaches, and something in his expression suggests he has been expecting this conversation. Mira sits beside him, the gap between them feeling both vast and insignificant. For a long moment, neither speaks. The sounds of children playing fill the silence. Sage and Arya have found each other near the swings. Their laughter rising like music neither parent dares to interrupt. "I need to understand why you helped us." The words come out quieter than intended, stripped of defensive armor. Rowan's hands rest on his knees, calloused and scarred from construction work, and he studies them as if reading a map written in old wounds. 7 years ago, I was living in my truck with a 6-month-old baby. Arya's mother left us 3 days after she was born. Just walked out of the hospital and never came back. His voice carries the flatness of facts repeated so many times they have lost their ability to wound, but Mira can hear the ghost of old pain underneath. He describes nights in parking lots, getting moved along by police, the constant fear that someone would call Child Protective Services and take Arya away. He talks about washing bottles in gas station bathrooms, about the shame of asking for diapers at food banks, about the specific desperation of loving someone more than your own life while being unable to provide basic safety. The words paint a picture Mira recognizes with terrible intimacy, the picture of drowning in plain sight while the world walks past pretending not to notice. Then I met Elias Montrose. I was parked behind his construction site, and he knocked on my window. I thought he would threaten to call the cops. Instead, he offered me a job. Rowan's expression shifts, softening with a memory that still carries warmth. He explains how Elias did not just give him work, but gave it with a specific kind of dignity that allowed a drowning man to believe he was swimming on his own power. No pity, no condescension, no debt hanging over his head like a sword. Just an opportunity to prove himself, to rebuild, to become someone his daughter could be proud of. Elias told me something I have never forgotten. He said real help leaves a person standing, not indebted. It gives them what they need to save themselves, then steps back and lets them do it. The philosophy lands between them like a bridge being constructed from words. Mira feels something unlock in her chest, understanding flooding in where suspicion used to live. Every action she interpreted as manipulation suddenly reframes itself through this lens, not a predator positioning prey, but someone extending the same lifeline that once pulled him from drowning. The job offer was never about control. The park encounters were never surveillance. The hospital payment was never leverage. It was all just a man remembering what it felt like to need help and being terrified of offering it wrong. I saw you at that restaurant and I saw myself. I saw Arya when she was Sage's age. And I moved too fast, scared you, made everything worse. His voice cracks slightly on the last words, regret written in the lines around his eyes. Mira reaches out without thinking, her hand covering his for just a moment, a gesture of forgiveness and understanding. You did not make it worse. You did what someone once did for you. I was just too afraid to see it. The admission costs her something, stripping away the protective lie that her paranoia was justified. The truth is messier. Her trauma has been both shield and prison. Keeping out dangers that might never come while also keeping out help that desperately needed to arrive. Rowan looks at her directly for the first time since she sat down, and in his eyes she sees no expectation, no hidden agenda, no strings waiting to tighten. Just the profound relief of being understood, of having his intentions finally recognized for what they always were. You do not owe me anything. Not gratitude, not obligation, nothing. The hospital bill is paid and forgotten. The job offer stands if you want it, disappears if you do not. Your life is your own. The words settle over Mira like a blanket after years of shivering. For the first time since Corvin Nash, she allows herself to consider that maybe, just maybe. Some people extend hands simply to help others stand, with no intention of ever pushing them back down. The job interview at Montrose Construction feels less like an interrogation, and more like a conversation between people who understand that everyone carries invisible scars. Jennifer from Human Resources walks Mira through a skills assessment that focuses on what she can do rather than dwelling on resume gaps. Mira answers questions about organization and reliability with directness born from having nothing left to lose. When the offer comes 3 days later, it arrives with health insurance, paid time off, and a salary representing more money than she has seen in 5 years. The letter makes no mention of Rowan, contains no special favors, just a standard employment contract proving she earned this on her own merit. The validation lands harder than the money, though the money changes everything too. Within 2 months, Mira and Sage move into a small apartment with working heat and windows that lock properly. Sage enrolls in the elementary school 2 blocks from Harborview Park. The same school Arya attends, and the girls become inseparable in the way only children can manage. Mira watches her daughter laugh without the shadow of hunger haunting her eyes, watches her run without the heaviness of adult worries. Weighing down her small shoulders, and something that has been clenched tight in Myra's chest for years finally begins to loosen. On a Saturday morning 6 months into her new life, Mira finds herself volunteering at Evergreen Outreach Center, a community organization providing resources for families experiencing homelessness. The building smells like industrial cleaner and desperation and hope mixed in equal measure, a scent she recognizes from the inside out. She helps sort donated clothes, organizes food pantry shelves, and sits at the intake desk, where people come to ask for help with the specific shame of needing to ask. During one shift, she sees the woman young, maybe 25 years old, with a toddler clinging to her leg and an expression Mira knows intimately. The woman approaches the desk with shoulders hunched, eyes darting toward the exit as if calculating escape routes. I need help. I do not know where else to go. The words come out barely above a whisper, and Mira sees herself reflected in this stranger's fear. She listens as the woman explains her situation in fragments: an abusive ex-boyfriend, a job lost, an eviction notice giving her 3 days. The details differ, but the shape of the crisis is identical: a person drowning while standing on dry land, surrounded by people who do not see or choose not to look. Mira does not offer pity. She does not make promises she cannot keep. Instead, she provides information about emergency housing, writes down numbers for legal aid and domestic violence resources, explains the application process with directness that respects the woman's intelligence. Then, quietly, she slips her own phone number on a piece of paper folded small. If you need someone who understands, call me. Not for money or favors. Just to talk. The gesture is small, but she has learned that drowning people do not need grand rescues. They need someone to acknowledge they are struggling, to throw a rope without attaching it to obligation. The woman takes the paper with trembling fingers and tucks it into her pocket like a secret treasure. As she leaves, Mira recognizes the specific way the woman holds her daughter's hand: protective and desperate and fierce all at once. It is the same way Mira held Sage for years, the same way mothers everywhere hold children when the world feels too dangerous to navigate alone. Walking home that evening as autumn light paints the city gold, Mira thinks about Elias Montrose. A man she never met but whose philosophy now guides her actions. She thinks about Rowan, who took the gift he received and passed it forward without fanfare. She understands now that kindness is not a transaction but a relay race, where the baton gets passed from one struggling person to the next. Each one running their leg before handing off the hope that carried them through. The woman at the outreach center might never call, might never need Myra's specific help. But she will carry that piece of paper as proof that someone saw her suffering and offered witnessing without judgment. And maybe, when her own life stabilizes, she will offer that same witnessing to someone else. The cycle continues not because anyone keeps score, but because people who have been pulled from drowning remember what it felt like to go under, and they cannot help but reach for the next hand struggling to stay above water. 2 years pass in the quiet accumulation of ordinary miracles. Mira receives a promotion to office manager at Montrose Construction, her skills earning respect that has nothing to do with charity. She rents a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood where children play outside without constant vigilance. Sage thrives in school, her report cards decorated with praise from teachers who see only a bright, curious child unburdened by poverty. The transformation accumulates across hundreds of small victories: meals eaten without calculating costs, bills paid on time, sleep that comes without nightmares of eviction. On a Saturday afternoon in late spring, Mira stands in the office of Evergreen Outreach Center, writing a check that makes her hand tremble. $5,000, donated in the names of Rowan Thorne and Elias Montrose. The director accepts it with hands that understand the weight of generosity. The donation will fund emergency housing vouchers for 3 families, keep the lights on for another quarter. Be the difference between someone getting help or falling through cracks that swallow people society deems disposable. Mira knows her contribution is modest, but every dollar represents hours of her labor, represents the distance traveled from the woman who once counted change to the woman who can now offer others a path toward stability. That evening, both families gather around a dinner table in Rowan's backyard, where a grill sizzles and spring air carries the scent of freshly cut grass and possibility. Arya and Sage chase fireflies with unself-conscious joy, their laughter punctuating adult conversation. Rowan tends the grill with careful attention, remembering when feeding people was an act of profound significance. Mira sets out plates, moving through the choreography of domesticity that once seemed impossible. Elias would have been proud of what you have built. Rowan's voice carries across the yard, quiet enough that only Mira hears. She looks up to find him watching her with an expression holding no romantic intent, just the deep recognition of one survivor seeing another thriving. They have never become more than friends, have never needed to. The bond between them is built on something more durable: the shared understanding of people who have been to the edge and climbed back. He would have been proud of what you built. You took what he gave you and multiplied it beyond anything one man could do alone. The truth settles between them like a benediction. Rowan's company now employs 47 people, many hired through outreach programs where Mira volunteers. His business model prioritizes second chances over pristine resumes, understands that employment gaps often represent survival rather than failure. 3 of his employees are women Mira worked with at the center, women who arrived drowning and are now teaching themselves to swim. The ripples of one man's kindness to one desperate father have spread farther than anyone predicted. As darkness settles and fireflies multiply into earthbound constellations, Mira watches Sage show Arya a new dance. She thinks about the night at Blue Lantern Grill when terror made her run from a man whose only crime was caring. She thinks about the hospital where Rowan paid a debt he was never owed. She thinks about the woman at the outreach center clutching a slip of paper, carrying proof that someone saw her suffering. The story does not end here because stories like this do not end, they transform into other stories, other chances. Other moments where hands reach out hoping someone will grasp them. The cycle of compassion does not complete itself like a circle. It spirals outward like rings in water, each ripple touching shores the original stone will never see. Elias's kindness echoes through Rowan's life, through Myra's life, through Sage and Arya. Who will grow up believing the world contains people who help without hidden costs? Perhaps when they are adults navigating their own crises, they will remember this and reach for someone else who is drowning. The legacy is not in the money or jobs or donations. The legacy is in the radical belief that people deserve dignity in their lowest moments, that help can be given without demanding repayment. That kindness compounds across generations when offered with open hands instead of closed fists. Under spring stars, surrounded by laughter and the simple miracle of a shared meal. Mira finally understands she has become what someone once saw in her potential, a person who survived and chose to pull others toward survival rather than climbing alone. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts below. Your voice may be the comfort someone else needs today. Feel free to pass this story on to a friend or family member who might need a little hope. And if you would like to hear more true stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, please consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching. This has been Golden Heart Stories.